I know most of you guys already know this, but of course I have to come out and give my take on this because it's something I actually predicted with 100% accuracy in a video just a couple days ago when I was talking about how people feel about their jobs and how likely people think they are to get fired is basically at an all-time high. And in that video, I said that the jobs revisions were going to be downward, guaranteed, and probably off by about 30%. And that's exactly what happened, guys. And you know, this is proof that they have been lying the whole time. And who's they? The Fed, the BLS, the federal government, everybody. You know, all these guys have been lying about a couple things. They've been lying about how good the economy is when it actually isn't. And they've also been lying about the numbers, you know, and a lot of important decisions get made or don't get made based on all this bogus data. You know, that's the biggest problem. You know, these guys are making interest rate cut decisions. And of course, as we know, interest rates, you know, make a huge difference in what happens in this economy or what doesn't happen. And I think what these revisions actually show is, number one, that they're way off on what they actually reported. You know, the actual unemployment is being underreported and the gain in employment is being overreported. And the funny thing is, I've seen, I don't even know, man, probably hundreds of comments from people who watch this channel saying, oh, nothing to worry about. Unemployment's at 3.5%. The jobs numbers were 250,000 this month. If you go back on older videos, I guarantee you can find hundreds of comments like that of people sitting there brainwashing themselves thinking that all is well in the world and nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, it was all based on a lie. You know, I'm sorry to laugh at you, but I've been telling you this is the case for a very long time. And some people just don't want to wake up and see it. And some people don't want to acknowledge it until it's right in their face. And now no one has a choice because, you know, the jobs numbers were off by 818,000, which is crazy, guys. But is it really crazy? Or did we all see this coming? At least some of us did, right? You know, there was supposed to be 2.9 million jobs added from April 2023 to March of 2024, and it got revised down to 2.1 million. And the worst part is, not only were those jobs numbers off by as much as they were, but how many of those 2.1 million jobs that were created actually full-time jobs that people can make a living off of and not have to have a second one or a side gig? You know, almost none of them is the answer. And that's really the most worrisome part about it. You know, not only were there so many fewer than what we were being told, but the jobs that are being created are crappy jobs no one wants. And by the way, I'm walking next to Corte Madera Creek today. I got some email suggestions from a few of you guys of places to walk and do videos, and I actually did one here last year when I was here. But anyways, it's a beautiful spot to shoot, you know, right by the water like I like it, and you guys like to see it. Now, this new jobs report probably is the final nail in the coffin for the potential upcoming interest rate cut in September from the Fed. You know, the markets were already pricing in 100% chance that they were going to do this. Probably now it's 150% chance. And I'm still laughing at these guys. You know why? Because as soon as they start cutting interest rates, that's the moment everything's going to start falling apart. Even though many people think this is going to fix all of our problems, when in fact it's going to start exacerbating them, most notably inflation. And you know, here's something else that we were lied to about, right? All the government data that we've been getting recently is typically not as good as it's being reported, right? This goes to show you that, you know, the people who are actually unemployed is much higher and the job openings are much smaller. And, you know, we can apply that same principle to inflation. You know, they say it's down to 2.9%, but it's probably really still 6%. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of things that you can gather from this. You know, you can draw a lot of conclusions from how off this data has been because it's always being underreported or overreported in the favor of making the economy look stronger than it is. And here's the thing, guys, in 2024 that I find interesting with all the technology, with all the AI, with everything we got going on right now when it comes to keeping track of numbers and data, that this is the second largest revision ever. Well, how are they getting it this wrong in 2024 with all this technology? I mean, to me, This just means that all the technology we have is essentially useless if they can't even get these important data parameters correct. But you have to understand that this bad jobs revisions report actually shows that the interest rate hikes that we've seen in this economy are finally starting to work, which is a good sign. The problem is they want to cut it off prematurely. They don't want anyone to feel any pain from this. So the solution is let's start cutting rates in panic mode in hopes that we can turn all this around. Well, all that's going to do is make life more expensive for everybody as inflation goes back up again. I mean, they even have the audacity in this story to say, but don't worry, the rate of hiring is still very good historically because the US added an average of 180,000 new jobs a month from 2010 to 2019. As if we're even supposed to believe that anymore. And the funny thing is that the Fed recently just mentioned, I think Jerome Powell said this, that the labor market is coming into better balance, meaning that the demand for labor is no longer outstripping the supply. But when you combine this bad jobs revision downward along with the rising unemployment rate, it makes them look stupid. And it also proves what we already know, that they have no clue what they're doing. So one thing I'm watching for is when they do the rate cut in September, is it going to be by 25 basis points or is it going to be by more? Because I think if they do a bigger one, if it's by 50 or even 75 basis points, which is kind of unlikely, but if they do it, that's them also hitting the panic button, guys. We talked a couple weeks ago about this whole emergency rate cut that a lot of people thought they were going to do, which hasn't happened, which is good because that would be the panic button. But I think this is the plan B to the panic button, is lowering rates faster than they brought them up, right? If they start lowering them by 50 or 75 basis points, those are larger decreases for the most part than what we saw on the way up. But then they'll probably just make up the excuse and say, well, because the revisions were, so big and they went in such a downward motion, we're basically doing 2 rate cuts in one here because, we should have done it sooner. That's kind of what they'll say if this happens. But you can really expect this problem to get a lot worse because looking back at the data, guys, you can go look all this stuff up for yourself on the Fed charts. But when we look at the historical data of the federal funds rate, every single time the Fed starts to cut rates, we see a big spike in unemployment. And it has already been spiking and they haven't even started with the rate cuts yet. So that leads me to believe that once the first rate cut comes, bye-bye, there it goes. It's going to start going up pretty substantially, just like we've seen in the past. There's no reason to think it won't at this point. But yet all the people who write these stories and are talking good things about the economy are saying and thinking that as soon as they start cutting rates, then everything's going to be fine. And there's going to be more hiring, and it's going to help lead to a more robust economy. Well, let's see about that, huh? Now, one issue I want to bring up is Kamala Harris's plan that she just announced to build 3 million new homes in the United States. And don't worry, guys, I'm not going to get political with this. I just want to go over the plan to see how good this is and, kind of poke some holes in it and see if this will actually work. The problem is anytime a politician puts forward any sort of motion like this, then it always involves spending money that we don't have, right? So when we spend money we don't have, we have to print more money, which leads to higher inflation, and higher inflation leads to everything else costing more. So keep that in mind as we look through this plan. So one thing she wants to do is make housing more affordable, and she has pledged to build 3 million homes across the country during her first year as president. And she wants to offer tax incentives for home builders to construct starter homes, smaller, more affordable units for first-time buyers. She would also expand a current tax credit for businesses that build affordable rental housing. And she said she would double the Biden administration's $20 billion Housing Innovation Fund intended to support local governments and developers looking for new ways of building affordable housing. And the last thing is they want to reduce the amount of red tape and bureaucracy needed to build new construction properties. And these 3 million new homes are supposed to be in addition to what the home builders are already planning on building right now. So if this actually happened, we would see a massive boom in housing building across the country. And if you think supply is short, guys, we are going to have the complete opposite problem within about 5 or 6 years from now, when a lot of those homes come to completion, which is what we want, right? We want to have a bunch of houses for sale, helping lower the prices. You know, on the surface, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. However, when you look at how we get there, that's where it starts to fall apart, unfortunately. They say they also want to crack down on investors buying up homes in bulk and landlords from using price gouging algorithms. I don't know how they plan on doing that. But here's where the free money comes in, okay? They want to expand the Biden administration's assistance for first-time home buyers, proposing an average of $25,000 in down payment to support first-time home buyers. And I know a lot of people are going to say the same thing that you guys always say, well, you know, if people could steal all this PPP money and get all these EIDL loans and have all this fraud and da-da-da-da-da, people get student loan forgiveness, why can't we get $25,000 for free houses? And I've already explained this in prior videos, but what it comes down to is just because we made bad financial decisions in the past doesn't mean we should continue making them into the future. That's how we got into this mess, right? So giving away free money for all this stuff is never a good idea. We've proved that just a few years ago during the pandemic, and doing more of it will not be a good idea. I'll give you guys some reasons why this isn't going to work, but let's take a look at some of the barriers that they would be facing even if she gets elected and they want to implement all this, okay? These tax credits that she wants to give home builders would cost about $80 billion, okay? And Congress would have to agree to spend that $80 billion. And right away, back to what I said in the beginning, where does that $80 billion come from? Where are we getting this money? Because we don't have it, so we have to create it out of thin air, which is how all of the money is created in this country. We're going to have to borrow it into existence, which is going to make inflation an even bigger problem than it is right now. And besides all that, even if they were able to get all of this pushed through and get these tax credits for home builders and get the money approved, all that stuff through Congress, they would still be facing problems with local municipalities and governments. For example, right here in Marin County, where I'm walking, it's not easy to build a new place, guys. There's not that much housing here. There's a lot of empty open space here. It's a beautiful place. You know, you have lots of hiking trails, lots of protected woods and forests, but all that's protected. You can't buy that. You can't go build a house on that land. So yeah, there's a lot of nice open space places here, but it comes at a cost, a very high cost, in that there's not as much housing available and there's no new developments going up. So housing costs here are through the roof. And so the federal government doesn't dictate policy for local areas like this. They're not going to come in here and say, hey, you guys have to, you know, turn Mount Tam over there into an affordable housing district now. You know, they can't do that. All the zoning laws are controlled by local and state governments. And so the federal government has no say-so in that matter. Now they can try to influence state and local governments by bribing them essentially with more free money, right? Like, hey, if you guys turn Mount Tam into an affordable housing development, we'll give you, you know, $10 billion or whatever. But they can't force it, okay? So there's a lot of holes in this plan. And the big problem is government has already showed how expensive they can make housing, right? Because we have programs like FHA loans, we have 0% down loans, we have mortgage-backed securities, we have a lot of things that the government does to subsidize the cost of housing. And what has that done so far? It has caused the price to go through the roof, right? So if you start giving people $25,000 to buy houses, what's that going to do to the price of housing? Even if the home builders get the tax credits to build these starter homes, that money being pumped into the economy is inflationary. So how much are those starter homes actually going to cost? There's no definition here, as far as I can tell, of what a starter home even would be. There should be a price tag on it, and this shouldn't be allowed to go past that, right? And also, if the housing supply increases dramatically, and let's say they do build all these starter homes, right, and they are affordable. Let's say that they're $250,000 or less all over the country, right, which is basically affordable compared to what we're looking at for today's prices. Well, who's going to stop investors from scooping up those starter houses? Even if the regular average person can't afford to buy them at $250,000, what will stop an investor from picking up 5, 6, or 10 of them and turning them into rentals, right? I didn't hear anything about that. And why this big push to build more houses? There's plenty of new construction homes for sale right now that they already can't sell. Why not help people buy those current homes before even worrying about building new ones? Because developers have been slashing prices on new builds and they have more favorable interest rates than existing homes and they still can't get them sold. So maybe the supply issue is not as big as we've been told either, right? That's been the big thing about housing, is that there's a big supply shortage. And one thing I really question is why now? You know, Kamala Harris has been by President Biden's side for the past 3.5 years, right? Why only now do something about this and say, you know, we need to build 3.5 million houses? Why only now? Why couldn't they do something like this years ago? You know, what's to stop an investor from buying up these newly built starter homes and turning them into an Airbnb, or trying to flip them for a profit, you know, picking them up for 250 grand and then turning around and trying to sell them for 400 grand? Are there going to be protections against this kind of thing? I'm not sitting here saying it's a bad idea to build more houses. I think that they should, because it will, number one, give us more housing supply in the future that we might need, but also it will probably prove my point that I've been making here on the channel, that the supply really isn't the issue. You know, as long as people can buy as many houses as they want and turn them into rentals and investors exist and you have the big Wall Street landlords, I don't see what's to stop those guys from sucking up all that new inventory, especially if it's being offered at a much more affordable price than what you see on the market today. And the other thing is, guys, not everybody wants to be a homeowner, right? Being a homeowner in many cases today is quite a bit more expensive, not just from a monthly payment perspective, but also from the point of view, if something happens to your property, it's all on you. And as a renter, you don't have to worry about that. In fact, this plan that she has when it comes to housing is exactly what they did with student loans to go to college, guys. And look what happened with that. In fact, there was a news story today that talked about how a lot of colleges now are close to 6 figures a year with tuition, guys. Like the big, nice schools, we're talking places like New York University, Tufts University, Brown, Yale, Washington University. They all have a annual tuition of about $90,000 for this upcoming school year. $90,000, guys, approaching 6 figures. So they're predicting by 2026, these tuitions are going to be over $100K a year. First of all, who can afford that? Practically no one, right? Just like the housing market. And number two, how do people pretend to afford it? They get themselves into massive student loan debt, hoping and praying that the government's going to come in and bail them out one day, like we're seeing happen right now. And that's why people get upset, like, well, if they can get bailed out with the student loans, if big corporations can get bailed out, why can't homeowners get bailed out? Why can't they bail us out of credit card debt? Why can't they just bail us out of everything? Let's just Fight Club it all, right? Let's just erase all debt, guys. Start from zero. I mean, just take a look at this chart that goes back to 1971, guys. You can see how affordable tuition was for a private 4-year school. Forget about the public schools, because those are always cheaper, right? The private institutions are the ones that have jacked up their rates tremendously, okay? And in 1971, the yearly tuition was like, what, $12,000 a year back then? Now we're talking, the average is $41,000, but it's actually much higher than that with a lot of these prestigious schools. We're talking double. Why did it all of a sudden start going up after 1971? Well, a couple of things happened back then. Number one, our country's money was taken off the gold standard. That really helped with inflation. That's why we had this big surge in inflation in the 1970s. But besides that, another thing they did during this time frame is they started subsidizing student loans. The government started offering student loans, and as soon as schools realized, like, hey, these guys can now finance coming to school, we can start jacking up our prices, just like what's happened in the housing business over the past 30 or 40 years. So it's not a coincidence, guys. It's not a coincidence that all this stuff is getting more expensive because it's subsidized by the government. So you have to be careful when you hear about these political angles to try and, build 3 million houses, and, it might sound good on the surface, but when you look at what it will take to do that, it's all inflationary. And in the end, it's probably just going to continue to make housing more unaffordable, not more affordable. Now, I had a couple questions that I want to go over about the new homebuyer agreements and buyers being forced to pay commissions to real estate agents. Since I did a video about this, a few people asked some things and I want to acknowledge it here. So this person says, where is the motivation of the seller to list a house if no one is using a buyer's agent? Consider how high prices are right now. Isn't it apparent that buyers are already not buying? I like the idea, except it's going to slow down the home sales even more right now in a stagnating market. I figure the realtors know that only the wealthy are buying houses, but what happens after that is anyone's guess. It's confusion, and for one, we'll avoid the whole process for now. I will check on a property I'm interested in, and if it's listed, I will look elsewhere. Well, to answer that question, that's exactly why sellers still have a vested interest in offering a commission to a buyer's agent, because housing is unaffordable. So few people are buying right now that if they continue offering a commission to the buyer's agent, that is going to be a relief for the buyer and makes it more likely for that home to get sold. Somebody else had a question about getting into a contract with a listing. They said, hey Michael, I'm in the exact same situation you mentioned. I have a bad agent that we signed with a seller agent agreement for 6 months. How can we terminate the agreement and list with another agent? So if you look in your listing agreement, there'll be something in there called the cancellation policy. And depending on what they wrote in there, it's usually a fee. Now, you should have seen this when you listed your house for sale, but if you didn't, go pull out your listing agreement, take a look at it, and under the cancellation fee, usually they will write in whatever they feel is appropriate. So if you see this and it says 0, well, congratulations, you can cancel this agreement by just telling them you want to cancel it, give them written notice, you want to be out of this agreement, and be done. If there is a cancellation fee, you could also just pay it and give the written notice and say you're firing them. Or if you really feel like it, you can sit down and have a conversation with them and say, listen, I hired you, I'm not happy with the job that you're doing, and I want you to cancel this agreement, and I don't want to pay a cancellation fee if they have one in there. If there isn't one in there, just give them the written notice and let them go. But if they're trying to charge you, maybe sit down and voice some of your concerns about why you want to hire someone else. And lastly, this person says that I'm looking at this too much from a realtor's perspective, but I see this awful new NAR change as catastrophic for buyers. I see lots of buyers dropping out of the game because it will cost them thousands more when they are already being stretched to the hilt just to buy any house. We're looking for a home in another state, but we've decided to stay put because of this. We feel legal challenges might change the ridiculous rule of buyers having to sign a contract and pay a broker. We'll wait a year or two. If we can view FSBOs or open houses without having to hire and pay a broker, we'll do it. Otherwise, we're out of the game for now. As a seller, I have no problem paying a 5% commission. As a buyer, I'm not paying anything. I'm paying enough just to buy the darn house. And listen, I think a lot of buyers feel exactly like you do. And that is going to contribute to home sales dropping through the floor, at least initially. But once again, that is another incentive for sellers to continue offering this commission. Just like you said here in your comment, that you would still be willing to pay a 5% commission as a seller, but as a buyer, you don't want to pay anything. And I think that's largely what we're going to see happen. It's too soon to tell, but I believe that's where this is headed. But to just give a refresher on this, it's not like real estate agents wanted this, guys. The National Association of Realtors and multiple brokerages were sued in a lawsuit, and this change was forced, as part of the settlement agreement in court. This is what home sellers wanted, okay? This is what clients wanted for the real estate industry. It's not like real estate agents were running around saying, hey, we want to force our buyers to pay a commission. No. This was all asked for by the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. So now people are finally getting what they asked for, and they're realizing that, hey, this probably isn't such a good deal for us. It's a good deal for the seller. It's not so good for the buyer. But as a seller, you usually end up becoming a buyer after you sell. So kind of shooting themselves in the foot. I get it. So yeah, maybe this all will be challenged in court, but who's going to challenge it, right? Because this is what the plaintiffs of this lawsuit wanted and have been granted. So I don't know if it's going to be overturned we'll see. I'll definitely keep you guys posted on the channel if it is. So I hope answering these questions for you guys have been helpful. And if so, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here. And I'll see you in the next one.